Alright, let's head to New Game Plus and actually skip the boss. Now, what we have done so far is actually just we got the Antiquated key and we unlocked Macduff. We didn't do anything else yet, like we didn't go and fight the boss, because we don't wanna. And that Soul Vortex, it's really good if you can actually hit an enemy with the sphere. As you can see here, it did a little bit more than 2000 damage. And it's especially good against bigger opponents. The Hate Knight is normal sized, and while it does do decent damage, it's not really as good as it was against that other big guy. And oh yeah, the Drakekeeper's Great Axe here actually has a little bit more range than most Great Axes. Or any other Great Axe in fact. And this is what makes it so useful, aside from the fact that it has really good scaling and also high attack power. Now, while we are going to skip the boss, I'd like to note that I don't really think there's much of a reason to do so. At least I don't really do it usually. I think fighting the boss is actually quicker. Unless of course you really have trouble with it. In that case you can get past it, but if you can't beat that boss you won't be able to beat the boss that comes afterwards, because that one actually is hard. But we're gonna see that in a while. Definitely not this time. Now we just turn to the right after going down the ladder, and don't ignore this hole in the wall this time around. Previously, we didn't go in there because we didn't have the Antiquated key yet, which is required to actually progress through here. It's fairly easy to get though. I mean, you've seen it. You just enter from the other direction and quickly go through a short segment and you have it. And oh well, I know that there's one of those mummies in there. And those mummies, they are kind of difficult to fight. The fact that your swing can be manually adjusted mid-swing actually causes a little bit of trouble here. It would be smarter to use a weapon that has horizontal swings. Now, the Drakekeeper's Axe of course does have horizontal swings, and I will be using them from now on when fighting those. And yep, that's the one door. Those mummies, by the way, it doesn't really matter what weapon you use for them, you can use basically any weapon. They have such ludicrously low HP that they basically die from one hit, just no matter what you use. And here we see a well. Now, we know this trick already, so let's knock down that rock. This time we don't get an item, we get more of those mummies. But of course I go at it wrong. And almost explode. Twice. Now this is a little bit infuriating, because if you kill all those mummies, they actually do drop the Wanderer set. And if you fuck it up on your first time around, they won't appear the second time. But thankfully we already have the Wanderer set. And we died a completely stupid death because I was absolutely unable to just two-hand the axe to make it do the horizontal swings. This area here kind of reminds me a little bit of the painted world of Ariamis from the first game, because that one also had a lot of hidden places, nooks and crannies to explore. But what this area here is actually mirroring in terms of the first game is the Undead Asylum, which was a place where they brought all the undead because they didn't want to deal with them anymore. What did they do? Well, we didn't know. They probably hung around being undead. And being undead basically means you're a normal human, only you kind of go green. And eventually you go hollow though, and that means you're insane. Which is probably the reason they actually locked them up in the first place. Now, the Lost Bastille, which actually means the Lost Fortress, has been remodeled into a prison of that kind to lock away the undead. We're gonna learn that a little later in this video, actually. but for now just take my word for it. In the first game actually, the Undead Asylum was the starting area, and your first act as player character of the game was to break out of it. While we don't do this in that game here, this game, Dark Souls 2, actually does have quite a few parallels to the first game, aside from being a sequel, of course. There's quite a few areas that fulfill similar purposes, like the Lost Bastille and the Undead Asylum. This is kind of a letdown, but you might have noticed the cage in the background there. We'll be coming back to that a little bit later. It's kind of reminiscent of the one Huntsman's Copse though, you know, the one that's an elevator. For now, let's actually open all the other chests in this room, because they do contain nifty things, like for instance the parrying dagger. It's in essence a dagger. It does what the dagger does, only a little bit worse, but it also allows you to parry. But that doesn't really set it apart from the other weapons you can parry with, which is quite a lot of them. However, the parrying dagger also has more active frames on the parry, which means that you have a little more leeway in terms of timing when you try to parry. My eyes spy an item up there. Now this game in quite a few places actually tempts you with something, in that it basically shows you it's there, and then the trick is getting to it. In this case it's really easy, because we just have to go back a bit and climb up a ladder. But if you remember Earthen Peak for instance, where we basically could only see an item up on the balcony, and then finding that behind an illusory wall, well, that was a whole different level. There will also be another one of those items later on in this video actually. In fact, we've already seen it in the first part of this episode here. It's hanging up on the wall on a corpse, and I actually barely ever get it. But I will this time, of course. But while this door looks tempting, I think we're gonna go back down. We will be back though, so don't worry. But if you feel like just quickly skipping the boss and most of the area, this is basically where you want to be. Because it's the end of the Lost Bastille actually. And you probably noticed that there was an item on a ledge halfway up the elevator. If we had dropped down, we could have gotten this, but I didn't wanna. It's pretty risky and not really worth it. It's just a bonfire ascetic, and there's easier ways to get those, plus I have plenty, plus I don't really need that many anyway. No, this path here is actually, well, just a shortcut back to a different part of this area, and I don't know why it's there. But at the very least there's a red phantom dog here, so that's something. No item though. Except that one, which is the one I alluded to earlier. We're gonna get that later. For a long time I actually had no idea how to get it. It's probably one of the most well hidden items in the game, and I don't think it's nearly good enough to warrant its obscurity. I'm of course not saying that it's bad. It has its uses, but more on that once we actually find a way to get it. For now, let's just go back up. I said that this is the end of the Lost Bastille, but we're not quite done yet. Still not gonna get that bonfire ascetic though. Well, here's more of those horrible mummies. You might say now, well, that's only 2. But guess what? There's more. Right up here. And if we had opened that gate with that switch there, yes, that would have been the exit out of the Lost Bastille to the next area. And yet there we have quite a few of those mummies up here. They can cause you a lot of trouble if you don't really have a good way to deal with them. I was kind of hoping for Homing Crystal Soul Mass to actually hit more of them, but predictably enough, they all homed in on one, as they usually do. Homing Soul Mass only very rarely actually targets multiple enemies, but it sometimes does happen. And I guess it's good that we actually bought a fragrant branch of yore in Ironkeep, because this was our last one. For now at least. We'll be finding more and we'll unpetrify more people. Or rather, enemies. Mostly enemies.
Still a bit stiff, I'm afraid. I must thank you, young traveler. I am Straid, a wandering sorcerer of sorts. I've been a guest for a very long time, but I don't think that anybody will miss me. Very good indeed. Cursed one, weak you may be, but I, Straid, will teach you my spells. So, how long was I sat petrified? Long enough for the old kingdom to have crumbled, I see. Why didn't anyone wake me sooner? Drang Lake. I've never heard the name. Is that what they call this place now? Very good. Very good indeed. The cursed ones were imprisoned within this land. Of course, you came of your own free will. The people feared the cursed ones like a plague. Some people would rather keep dreadful things out of sight, out of mind. In the end, they swept them up and corralled them here. So very typical of meek minds, don't you think? Once people became aware of their own frailty, they seized anybody they found undesirable, cursed or no, and impounded them here. Whoever posed even the slightest threat was removed, all so that they could sleep better at night. They even turned the great Straid into a stone. Many kingdoms rose and fell on this tract of earth. Mine was by no means the first. Anything that has a beginning also has an end. No flame, however brilliant, does not one day splutter and fade. But then, from the ashes, the flame reignites, and a new kingdom is born, sporting a new face. It is all a curse. And it is your cursed flesh that will inherit the flame. Pyromancy was created by the ancient witch of fire. She harnessed the power of flame and melded it into pyromancy. The witch led her daughters into war against the old ones. But legends are legends. What are you prepared to believe?
So Straid here has a lot of interesting things to say. He's also a little bit of a dick. But aside from that, he is also a very adept magician. I'm not saying sorcerer or miracle caster or pyromancer or hexer here, because he actually does all of them. He sells all 4 of them, a couple of them anyway. And Flameswathe is actually a pretty good pyromancy, It was really overpowered earlier. It's pretty useful still though. In fact, it's still very, very powerful. What he actually does though is that he trades souls of bosses for weapons. I'm not gonna show all of them though, because some of them actually are pretty spoilerific. I found every soul once already, so we see every single item we can make.
Feeble, cursed one. Do you really think you can manage the glories that are my spells?
This is the second most horrible bonfire in the game, so I'm only gonna light it in order to be able to warp to it later, but not gonna actually rest at it. Instead, to restore my durability, I'll just repair my weapon with an item. Just so I don't actually have to rest. Now, let's actually go down here though. We haven't been at that part before, and it's basically the last bit that we need to explore. There's more mummies here, but if you do it that way, they're really easy to deal with. The mummies are only really dangerous in open areas, and they're also only really dangerous if you actually have either a really slow weapon or a weapon that requires a lot of precision, because that'll make it easy to whiff. And in the cage there is actually the bonfire aesthetic that I refused to get twice. And now here's a very obvious illusory wall, and it's also pretty obvious that there's another one in this room here. And after finding it, you might be led to believe that you're done with finding hidden shit, but not really, not yet at least. I mean, sure, you'll find a couple items here. They're easy to spot, and that over there, by the way, is not the item that's stuck on the wall. We'll be getting that very soon though. And this would lead us back to the place where the ruined sentinels were, or are still in this case. But we're not gonna do that. Now here we do have, of course, a really anticlimactic item. But the real treasure lies here. And yeah, this is actually the path that leads us to that one item. We can see it right up ahead. I never would have thought of doing this. I needed a guide to find out how to get there. And it's a shield that's pretty good for magic defense. Much like the shield that we're using right now. Only it's a lot lighter. So if you don't have a lot of strength, yep, the gold wing shield is actually your choice. It has very little physical defense though. Much, of course, like the shield that we're using right now. But I like the way it looks, so I'm using it. Yeah, style over substance, that's how I roll. And I was a little disappointed to not find another illusory wall here. And this is actually the part that we could see from outside. We could have dropped in here and we would have been there, but there's no real reason to really. We can't even go back into the general direction of the ruined sentinels from here, but it would lead there if that gate were open. And we're gonna have to defeat the ruined sentinels actually to show off something optional. For now though, we're actually done here. We're just gonna go up and rest at that bullshit bonfire now. And I do hope that you enjoyed this episode. See you again next time.